My name is Niklas Swanström, and I'm heading the Institute for Security and Development Policy. So what we're going to do is talk about beyond de-risking towards the resilient framework for EU-China economic relations. And of course, economic security has been a pillar of European policy areas. We're talking about supply chain security, we're talking about tech dependence, we're talking about the de-risking. Similarly, China has expanded its economic toolbox with new regulations and what many in Europe would see as a weaponization of critical minerals. And I think Joanna spoke a bit about the challenges we were facing as well. So we have a great panel here. We can answer a few questions. I mean, basically, how do we move from de-risking towards, or how do we avoid moving from de-risking towards regulatory confrontation or even trade wars? What are the triggers and what are the cushions in this? What are the boundary between legitimate economic security, protectionism, and economic warfare? And I think that Joanna pointed out one good thing here. Europe is not necessarily obsessed with trade, being sort of reliant on China or any other state, or that we have a trade deficit with actually right now on 1 billion per month or per day, 1 billion a day with China. That might not be the problem, but rather the reasons why we are facing those. What are the sort of the protectionism and economic incentives? But what mechanisms can EU and China employ to ensure better economic relations, both for states and companies? And then I would actually like to maybe echo Wulauscher a bit. He's sort of mentioned the third factor, United States, that we can't avoid. But as a Northern European and from the Baltic region, I would also look at Russia, which in many ways are more critical and much more crucial than the United States. How that impacts this relationship. But I'm not going to answer anything, thank God. I have 4 speakers who's going to give all the answers in a very, very short time. We have Ceren Ergenc, and I apologize for the pronunciation, who is at the Center for European Policy Studies and Autonomous University of Barcelona. Her expertise lies in China's domestic international policy processes. We have Cui Hongjian, who is at the Academy of Regional and Global Governance at the Beijing Foreign Languages University. And he studies us Europeans by looking at European politics, European integration, global governance, and China's relations with Europe. Jin Ling is the... Yeah. No. Oh yeah, this is the old one, yeah. So, and then, so I'll let you introduce yourself there. And then we have Tim Rühlig, who is the European Union Institute for Security Studies, and he looks at China's foreign economic and technology policy, EU-China relation, economic security. And with that, I'm going to go as it looks now in the program. So, Ceren, I'm going to let you start with a short introduction.
Okay, I have to have the self-introduction. I'm Jin Ling from CIIS, China Institute of International Studies. Today, I temporarily to replace Liang Ling to take the role, join the panel about the de-risking. So very nice to be here. Yeah, I'm hoping for a fruitful exchange. Thank you.
And thank you for stepping in. So, no.
Hello. So I'm going to directly go into the question of how to be partners in a world of de-risking or double de-risking, if I may, for time's sake. So we hear being partners from the Chinese side a lot, and it is also in the EU's official discourse as well in this tripartite definition of China. So there is the potential to be partners. But then the question is how to make it happen through concrete, actionable steps beyond the rhetoric, beyond the official discourses, because there are structural differences that prevents this partnership happen on its own. So it needs to be planned proactively and executed with efforts from both sides. Because, again, I would like to clarify my position on the term trade war as well. I think it is slightly misleading when we call it a trade war. It shifts the focus to trade deficits. But the core of the imbalance between China and Europe in general is the technology, war competition, and the foundation of it is the differences in industrial policies or industrial policy-making processes. And since this is a systemic structural difference, again, as I said, to be partners in concrete terms, we need actions. And coming from the background of Chinese policymaking and as a researcher in my previous life, looking at China's local governance, my suggestion for this partnership to be actionable is to continue the conversation through the involvement of stakeholders, especially those that typically fall under the radar at the local levels, at the sectoral levels, who have the on-the-ground experience with the issues to actually come up with solutions that are mutually beneficial for the existing issues and also to prevent the future emerging issues before they become issues between the two sides. And I'm going to come to that in a minute. My specific suggestion would be issue-based and sector-based committees to build up the partnership in a bottom-up way, not a top-down way, not a great bargain, but let's say a variegated great bargain to be built up from bottom up through sectors and regions and the multitude of actors involved in the process. So to be precise, both China and the EU and the member states have their own set of industrial policies that affect their trade and investment decisions. And that's only natural, and some of them are proactive, meaning to strengthen the industries, to support new emerging sectors, for example, and there are defensive ones to protect the markets and industries from stronger counterparts, let's say. And again, as I said, all economic actors do have that. And I'm going to include here the EU's global partners as well. China that EU's new laws and regulations in making is or comes across as protectionist. Well, it is the same kind of a mixture of proactive and defensive measures towards its other global allies, especially in China's immediate region like Japan, Korea, and whatnot, the other tech middle powers. So again, the question is how to formulate the EU-China or Europe-China partnership in a way that takes into consideration the structural systemic differences and mutually applicable. So there are two sets of issues I see in the China-Europe economic relations, industrial relations specifically. One is the current issues that we talk a lot, as our moderator also mentioned, the CRM issues, supply ban issues, that we need to develop specific mechanisms to deal with mutually. And then the second set is the emerging markets and emerging technologies to actually make this partnership work and prevent issues becoming issues, basically, in the future. So for the current issues, I think a bottom-up approach beyond or besides the high-level dialogues would actually help solve the issues at a granular level. And I'm going to give, if I have time, a couple of examples for that. One is the unified markets that is stated in China's current new 5-year plan. And the financial tools to make this unified market happen is not there yet. It's going to be decided at the local level in a decentralized manner at the provincial and city levels. So a joint committee that includes the on-the-ground stakeholders, the European actors in China, like the EU delegation to China, both the EU and national chambers of commerces, will actually help developing these financial tools in a way that is not detrimental to the European companies. And also beneficial for their Chinese counterparts, of course. The second example I have in mind is the supply chain ban China is considering to impose, which is based on the data laws. And again, the data laws are implemented at the local level in a decentralized way. So committees are working on the practical dimension of the application of data laws, like blacklist, whitelist, and other ways to actually implement these laws before it becomes an issue of or a part of the national security law might actually help. And last but not the least, the CRM issue. I'm going back to the CRM issue. Von der Leyen mentioned a committee to discuss the certification issues before the CRM ban becomes a weapon, or it becomes like weaponized against Europe to actually sort out the issues. So again, yeah, so these are for the current issues. And I'm going to finish my words again with a suggestion for the emerging technologies, emerging markets. So the overcapacity problem China has is based on its own industrial decision-making, policy implementation process. And well, it is not easy or maybe desirable to change it altogether. But if China and Europe will be partners in the future, the overflowing of European markets or the sidelining of European startups and innovation actors like research institutes and all that in the emerging technologies like quantum or fusion, then and there should be mechanisms to include the European actors in the process early on. For example, it's a common concern for both Chinese, I'm going to say the other Asian tech powers business sectors that the European markets are too small to invest in high technology sectors. So if that's the case, I will suggest China creating incentives for joint ventures for Chinese companies to work together with the European companies in these emerging sectors, like again, as I said, quantum and other like industrial AI issues. And with that joint ventures, we can actually reach the point of not technology transfer. So this is the talk of the town in Europe today, right? We don't want only assembly line factories, investments from China. We want investment, either greenfield or GVs, that actually does technology transfer, skills upgrading, and like added value offered to the European recipients of the Chinese investment. I will say for the emerging sectors, we need to go a step further than that, and instead of or besides technology transfer, we need to start talking about technology co-production and shaping the global markets together if we are going to be partners. And with that note, I'm going to stop. Thank you.
So thank you very much. It's very interesting. I mean, we're talking about systemic differences and all of that, and I think there's a lot to be solved before we enter into maybe quantum collaboration. But I think this points to some of the problems, and I think Cui Hongjian will add to the problems or challenges, and maybe a solution or two as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Indeed, I appreciate this opportunity to depend or continue our discussion. I very, very agree with our speech or presentation before about how it is important for us, especially for China and the European Union. We can continue this, firstly, I mean, the strategic partnership relations. If we know what happened for the past years within the European Union, some people or some countries, they were thinking that, okay, it's time to change the relations with China, even more competitive or even more, rival or some other. Fortunately, I share with Digitrade that now we're still on the way to have some more optimistic and also perspective on these relations. Another, I think, very important thing is now we are talking about how about the de-risking policy or measures from European Union institutions towards China. Before we try to go beyond from this so-called de-risking policy or strategy, I think we need to make clear what happened for the past 10 years. If we look at the background of so-called de-risking policy or strategy from European Union, according to my understanding, for a long time observation about the China-EU relations, especially on the economic sector, I think it was very, very fast reactions from European Union side in the background of the so-called first time for Trump administration. Because at that time, as we know, it was big tensions between China and the United States on trade. Even European people are talking about the suffering from this China-US trade war. But as we know that the European Union is good for the past decades in the background of globalization to have a global, distribution of labors or markets. and to take use of resources from North American and China and Asia Pacific. So once there are some more tensions between China and the US on trade, industry, some other, undoubtedly European Union will be very, very big victim. So frankly, this so-called de-risking policy at the very beginning is not just a target China. I think it's a very, very, reasonable, I think, reactions from European Union side to say, okay, I need to take some more measures. I need to find some more defensive, instrument to deal with this disorder of the trade or investment or some other. Secondly, the problem, how could we are talking about the de-risking issues just before China and the EU? I think it's a little bit ridiculous. Just like what happened for the opening remarks. Dr. Wu, he described what's the real risks now for us, for both of us, in a global context. If we are touching the trade investment issues, I think now the main problem is not from China. Everybody knows in this room. Even we are talking about the de-risking issues between China and EU, we have to take a note that there is an elephant in the room, is the United States. So high tariffs on trade. But so far we find out mostly compromise from European Union towards the United States. But a tougher and tougher attitude to China on this so-called de-risking issues. So I think it's a kind of an extremic situation. Another, I think, important thing is, to some degree, de-risking policy or strategy is related, yes, with trade investment, but less and less. It's related more and more with strategy, politics, security, or some other. So now a big question for us is, when economy met with security, what's the chemical reactions? We are dealing with this, we are handling with these uncertainties. The lady from DigiTrade, she mentioned a lot of consideration and also approach measures. How could the European Union look at the current situation, the overcapacity issue or trade deficit, everything? Yes, we do have these trade relations for a long time, for decades. But why is now to raise it as a very, very, difficult issue or very, very, big priority to deal with its relations with China or some other? So we have to go back to the background of so-called politicization or secularization of the relations, or this consideration or worldview from European Union to the world. And the third is, now it has very, very big impacts, also, from this de-risking policy or strategy from the European Union. To a large degree, it's a very, very big damage to this called WTO rules, especially if European Union just target China as a main problem or main threat or challenge in the frame of the de-risking strategy. So I think now the big difference between two sides is China is trying to convince European Union, say that, okay, you should have a wider vision about global trade, investment tendencies or structure. But from European Union side, no. Now the major problem, the biggest challenges from China is not spillover effect of the whole of the change of the whole structure. So I think yes, we need to narrow down these gaps between perceptions or perspectives. And now the question is, frankly, there is indeed, not only just discussion, and a real situation for so-called overcapacity or some other. But we need to find out the real reason for this overcapacity or some other issues or difficulties. People are talking about more production and less consumption in China, but a few people in European countries talking about more and more unilateral protectionism from the United States. Once there are some, a healthy and a stable trade relations between China and the US, undoubtedly there will be less and less pressure for European market when to face more trade with China. So frankly, even we can have a very frankly discussion about overcapacity or some other issues, we should just shape it in a frame that, okay, it's a mutual issue and it's a mutual threat. Frankly, overcapacity or some trade deficit or some other issues is a common challenge for both China and EU. It's not mutual threat for both two sides. Finally, yes, how could we try to find some approach or way out of these de-risking traps? I think firstly, yes, this year we can find that China is trying to find out a rebalance between its concern about so-called security in a geopolitical environment and continuing development requirement in the name of a 15 5-year plan. So how could we find out the opportunity for this background from this policy context for both China and the EU? China now is trying to have its so-called high quality development and also high quality of the openness and cooperation. China is going to open more and more its market, not only for manufacturing or some other, and especially financial and services. So how could the European Union side to find out, yes, it's time for us to get a rebalance? De-risking, I don't think it's a proper way from the European Union. Perhaps it's a reasonable measures to get a crisis management, but it's not long-term strategic thinking indeed. Also, Brussels is famous for its faster change of the weather. Yesterday, I had a city walk. Just within 2 hours, I met with 3 rains. Now, for China and the European Union, we are living in the weather, bad weather, but not so bad. So far, we not yet met with a storm. But now the raining day is too long for even starting from the last European Union Commission. So I think now it's time for both sides, especially from European Union side, to rethink about the de-risking policy strategy. Now it's time for European Union to change its crisis management thinking to maybe rebalance between crisis management and a long-time strategic thinking or approach to deal with its relations with China. Especially, finally, most important thing, comparing with other bigger economies, China maybe is not always most reliable one, but now, indeed, China is the most reliable market. I stop here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's also important to make a distinction here between when we talk about the US and US is not necessarily always the problem. what President Trump might be. So, I mean, I think it's important to make a distinction there as well. But absolutely, we do have a lot of challenges with the United States at the moment. And then Jin Ling, and I can promise you we had the pleasure of having you at ISDP in November. I was not there, but there was a very heated discussion. So, I mean, I think we can have a very good discussion now. So I welcome and I would love to listen to your thoughts here.
Thank you, Chair, and also takes place to thank you, Institute, to host me when I visit. First, I'd like to express my appreciation of the organizers' quite a cost-saving mindset without putting my name on the list, because we have the philosophy, we save the cost, but at the end of the day, everybody knows who I am sitting here. So thank you very much. Very interesting issue. I think today, when we talk about a de-risking strategy from EU side, after 3 years of trying and struggling, I think EU is still wondering where is the way out. It's very difficult to have the kind of balance. When you talk about de-risking, it's not decoupling, because there is a really very blurred line. And also, in line with kind of a struggle, you also have a very difficult balance to stay between the so-called we still keep opening up to the world while we still try to build up our strategic autonomy. And also, I think fundamentally speaking, today the biggest challenge for all the players in the world, how to balance the different priorities of development and security. So that is, I think, the common challenges actually for all the countries in the world because of the period we are living in. We couldn't deny that the bad evolution of the logic, that is to politicize, to securitize, it seems everything. But as the two biggest economies in the world, China and Europe, we benefited from the past globalization process. And today we are still embedded in the world economic system. So the first question in front of us is quite critical. That is, what exactly the biggest risk is? From my perspective, I see the system nowadays is evolving into uncharted water. That's the biggest uncertainties. The challenges imposed by unilateralism, by violation of the rules commonly agreed in the past is the biggest risk. So here I like to repeat what I've said in the EPC event. It's natural. We're sitting in different positions, we will fight against each other. But at the end of the day, we should find ways to survive together. So this is the first point I have to share with all of us. So this is also the starting point. We have to see the solutions or see the ways out. That today's problems, today's challenges is quite structural internationally. When we would like to address the issue, we should go beyond the bilateral mindset. A very interesting example today, it seems with the narrative China Shock 2.0, with I always read very scaring words from the media, from the narrative here in Europe, China killing everything here in Europe. For example, yesterday I saw the title, China is killing the chemical industry here. China is killing the car industry here. It's something, China is a killer. It's really scary words. It's not a good atmosphere or a kind of narrative to shape the way forward. So we need the more structural mindset to address the imbalances. The imbalances come from different aspects. Whether you think about overconsumption of US, whether you think about underinvestment here. So we need this kind of thinking. The second one, yes, all the actors in the world have to do your homework first. Today's problems or challenges, we put such emphasis on it. From Chinese side, we have our own internal challenges. Some of them are common with Europeans. For example, the aging population, the digital transition that will put the labor at risk, and also the very delicate balance we have to keep while on one side promoting green transition, on the other side to protect the basic rights of an energy user for traditional energies. But from EU side, you have the aging population, you have the heavy burdensome welfare system, you have lacked the investment of innovation. So all of these we should also put into the picture. And also, more important, what kind of interaction of each other's internal challenges when we are doing business together. So this is the second point I like to say. That naturally drives us to the third one. What kind of mindset we should have? I appreciate the opening remarks made by our European friend to say we have to face the realities. Whatever the causes there are, we have to face the realities. But without the common identifying the problems, the root causes of the problems, whether we could have the right way out. And if you look at the current reality, I also would like to remind another side of the coin. You talk about the surplus. I'm talking about the resilience of China-EU economic relations today. I'm not sure whether you have followed the recent publication produced by EU Chamber of Commerce in China. Actually, 68% of European companies are still expanding their production in China. Only 7% of the companies would like to shift their production somewhere else. And the major driving factors for them to continue investing in China is the cost, is the efficiency, is the automatic production. So here we could sense a fundamental logic are still running. That is the market is still the driving forces for the cooperation between China and Europe. It has been, of course, affected by the geopolitical concerns, security concerns. But I'm glad to see there's still the major driving forces. The entrepreneurs are still the best politician to make choice, I have to say. And I think the interlink between us is the guarantee of the path towards cooperative, trajectory. And secondly, is not so glad to mention. I think today we have to face the reality. If both sides are acting in a tit-for-tat way, then finally you will realize, just today both China and the US realize, that both sides have the capacity to have the disruptive impact on each other's economy. So that is a very cruel reality we have to face. So maybe it's better for us as academians, as think tankers, to have this kind of scenario planning, to see what will be the cost and the benefit, to continue this kind of trend. Last but not least, I think we should have a very low denominator or common denominator. If you look at the internal politics here and also in China, even you think we are different politically, but the delivery of livelihood is still the highest priority of all voters, of all the people in China, and also voters here in Europe. So I think that should be a clear guideline for us when we set our priorities. My last sentence should be, now is a time to rethink the relationship between the state and the market. To what extent the intervention, should be exerted on the economy. It's quite complicated. It needs strong wisdom to have this kind of, calculation. If all countries are acting in this kind of, it's your own country or nation mindset first, I think our European partners will definitely remember what the founding fathers of EU integration has ever repeated. Overemphasize of sovereignty, the evil, and then leading to the war. So I hope we are at this critical moment to, have the right choice. But luckily, I like to see the communication wheel is strong, the channel is open, and the strong interlinks between the companies are still there. So thank you all for your attention.
So thank you very much. So we have finally Tim Rühlig, who's going to be giving another European perspective, and we have plenty of European experts, but Tim always have very interesting ideas. So Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation, to the organizers for having me here. Couldn't think of a better panel to discuss this, so really, really glad. Let me maybe, since I'm the last one between the panel and the discussion, I try to be as brief as possible and sort of pick up it maybe from where Jin Ling left it here. Indeed, if we think sort of what should be the objective and the goal of EU-China relations, and I'm constraining it here to trade and economics or trade economics and technology and leave out sort of the security issues, I think they will be discussed elsewhere. Then indeed, I think sort of the objective should be, I would use the word coexistence, where both sides don't harm each other and develop, or maintain, I hope we have that already, but maintain respect for the fact that the other has other interests and that systems are different, and that we develop ways of acting that indeed don't harm the respective other. Now, in many cases, this may not be much of an issue, but in some ways, I think it is. And I also agree that a starting point is to have, well, ideally a common understanding of the challenges and the issues. And where this is not possible, at least start to have an acknowledgement of the respective others' problems and challenges. And they diverge to some degree still, I think, in perception. Now, let me maybe try to sort it in two buckets. I think one where there is still sort of a clash of perception of interests and how legitimate and valid they are, is around what is commonly discussed as overcapacity. But I think what it really is really an anxiety here in Europe to see deindustrialization. I think that's maybe the better prism to look through it. And on the Chinese side, I think very strong need for maintaining a high level of exports, not just to Europe, but also to the European single market, for reasons that both Professor Cui and Professor Jin have sort of referred to, at least sort of implicitly, also for a number of domestic economic challenges that I think in China, that I think are not always present in European policymakers' minds when they consider what China could easily do. So I think that's also important to keep in mind. The second bucket then will be sort of the de-risking, that I think is used as a term that very often sort of encompasses also these macroeconomic questions. And there are overlaps, but maybe it's still good to differentiate them. So the first bucket. I mean, I don't need to repeat the speech that Joanna gave before, sort of to repeat sort of the European perspective. Maybe just to say, for the record, I think that the state support that is much more pronounced, much bigger in China, subsidies, through a financial system that has more linkages to the state, that is sort of more directed towards policy guidance, that is a systemic difference that is a concern for a long time. I mean, we're talking about this for quite a while. I think it has become more pronounced for several reasons. One, I think the hope has faded that China is liberalizing, and that has always been, I think, a bit of a mystery here in Europe, and an arrogance to think that everyone ultimately will become a European style or a Western style. There's different ways of interpreting that, but that this form of economic liberalism will ultimately reach the entire world. But sort of that, when that realization sank in, I think that made a difference how the Chinese system was perceived. Second, I think the fact that China moved up the value chain so that the two economies were less complementary and competed more over similar market segments. So as long as you get cheap input that you don't produce yourself anyways, you may like it more than if all of a sudden your own products are not competitive over price anymore. So that I think is a second factor. And the third, I think, is lowering and quite weak consumption in China domestically. So I think there are reasons why this has accelerated, but the concern as such is not something new. We could have had the discussion maybe sort of in a less dense environment, but we could have had it quite a while ago. Now, I think I should probably not represent the Chinese perspective here, but you correct me where I'm wrong. What I think Europeans are missing is really the internal struggles, as I said, that China faces itself. I mean, the growth it's often referred to as the new normal. So the growth is, if you compare it to previous decades, is structurally lower than before. The growth model itself maybe not running out of steam, but if you think of sort of where does growth actually can come from, China has invested a lot over the last couple of decades in infrastructure. If you travel China, you can see this, how efficient the infrastructure is. So that was a source of growth, but also Chinese policymakers realized the first airport made a lot of sense, the second still, but the fifth, you come to an end. The Chinese build-out of infrastructure has reached a point where this may not be so much a driver of growth anymore. Then you have a quite low consumer confidence at the moment, I would say, following COVID and the burst of the real estate bubble. So there is not that much of an impulse coming from domestic demand, and it is extremely difficult for China to stimulate this. It is costly. Jin Ling referred to the aging society, so what is very often referred to as a reason for the high savings rate in China is that there is not the comprehensive welfare state that we are used to in Europe. That is indeed a burden for Europeans at the moment as well. But I think for China it's a bit the opposite, and building it up, even if not to the extent that you have it in Europe, would be extremely costly. China has been competing over relatively low labor costs as well. Even if that increases, that is also not something to solve overnight. So long story short, I mean, it is not that easy for China to change that model. And I think that is also something that is very often forgotten in Europe, because the remaining source of growth, or an important contributor to growth at least, is exports. Now, what I think is a real challenge at the moment is the perception of how we react to these differences. So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Chinese side is taking issue with plenty of these unilateral measures that Europe puts in place, a number of regulations, the proposed Industrial Accelerator Act, and so on and so forth. What I think is striking and interesting here is that while I do say, I think that we may not acknowledge sort of the challenges that China faces if it were to implement the demands that Europeans put on the table, I equally think that Europeans don't believe, are not certain that European concerns are taken seriously enough in this. And I'll give you just one example here, and that is that of the EV tariffs. I remember I was working for the Commission when the EV tariffs were announced. In the last part, I was not involved in the calculation itself, but I've seen sort of the Chinese reaction. I've read the letters that have arrived at the European Commission's headquarters. They were furious, really furious. I can tell they were not friendly. And that EV tariffs were not in China's interest, of course. But it was really an attempt to push against those. Interestingly, now the EV case is very often considered, when I go to Beijing, as a case with the price undertakings, the framework agreement for price undertakings from this January, as a case where we could sort it out. So as a positive example where there was an opportunity for Europeans and Chinese to find a compromise. I mean, no side got maybe fully what it wanted, but to reach a compromise. But what Europeans ask themselves a lot is, would we have gotten to the price undertaking without the tariffs before? And Europeans are not convinced that that's the case. So the feel is right now for our concerns and our anxieties to be taken seriously, we have to buckle up. We have to use unilateral means. We have to put pressure on China. We have to make sure that we are being heard in this. And only if that's the case, then we can reach sort of a negotiated agreement. And that is, I think, pretty much the playbook that Europeans are playing here. And to me, the question is how we can sort of skip this escalation period and negotiate those. And I would always say, in light of acknowledging a bit more on the European side as well, what the limitations are on China's side, because it has also indeed sort of its challenges. I'll be very brief on the de-risking, because that part, I think, is easier for both sides to understand, maybe not to solve, but at least intellectually I think it is easier. And Jin Ling has already said what the central point, I think, because the de-risking, in principle, I think, is something that we see globally. So we just use different terminology for it. And I think your reference to coordinating development and security is indeed, I think, sort of the thing. All sides sort of see the economic benefits of staying open and having open innovation ecosystems and trading with one another. But the resultant dependencies that are a natural result of any division of labor are considered in these years as a challenge by all sides. And frankly, I would say in China to some degree already before. I mean, I've recently worked on a study on pharma dependencies, and you can find sources in the 80s and 90s where Chinese policy documents quite clearly say, at the moment we are fully reliant or largely reliant on pharma imports from Europe, but we are not so certain how the future relations are going to be. Therefore, we should invest in our own pharma industry. So what I'm saying here is, I think that everyone thinks and feels that we are coming from a defensive viewpoint. China feels that, but Europeans also feel that. So everyone just wants to defend him or herself. But the perception of the economic security toolbox, de-risking, self-reliance, and so on and so forth that we put in place are very often perceived by the respective other as a rather proactive, aggressive, assertive, at least assertive act. And I think here I don't have a good answer of sort of how to understand what is considered legitimate or illegitimate, understandable or not understandable, that I think is very difficult in practice. But this is why I like the de-risking terminology, because I think it, at least ideally, it should force us in this bucket to identify quite specifically what the risks are that we want to address with that. And where we cannot name a risk, it should not fall under the de-risking. We should also sort of say, okay, what is... We should also acknowledge that there will be no risk world. So we should also acknowledge, okay, and clarify for ourselves which are the risks that we are willing to take. And those risks that we want to mitigate, we would need to know sort of what's the price that we want to pay. A last sentence on the US, and then I finish. I think that after all, the US is certainly a factor in this dynamic. There is no doubt about it. But I think it may be a bit overestimate, or it may not be helpful, at least for EU-China relations, to always consider it through the lens of the US. Because after all, even if it's a factor in it, European concerns are quite genuine. And I give you a final example here. This is the rare earth minerals. How often have I been going to Beijing and have I been told the export controls on rare earth minerals were not directed at Europe, but this is a global regime, so therefore Europe is also affected by it. We are not de-risking, and Professor Cui has said this, we are not de-risking against Europe. This is ridiculous. Okay. But the result is the result, you know, the effects are there. European companies are not just needing licensing licenses for export licenses. The experience is that European companies have had more difficulties to receive those export licenses than US companies. And just try to put yourself in European shoes. So you're asking yourself as a European, of course, why am I treated worse than the root cause of this problem, or the root cause for these specific export controls, the US? And and being a collateral damage here is even more worrisome, because you have even less influence whether you will be targeted of actions like this in the future. And you ask yourself, how can I make sure, or how can I decrease the risk of being a victim, even if I was not a subject or intended subject of this measure? And the response, again, is buckle up, get a sort of strength, be relevant, be able, get some leverage to, deter the other side, or at least when it takes that action, take your own, in this case, the European interests here. I think that's the approach. And again, we are in this logic of Europeans thinking they have to put pressure, they have to show at least unilateral measures, which is summarized in this strategy, escalate to de-escalate. And I think that to me is sort of the core subject at the moment that the two sides need to discuss. Sorry, that's longer than I planned. Sorry.
Let me just say that I think this was a fantastic panel. I especially appreciate the realization that we have challenges. I think there's a sort of Chinese thing that you have to first name the problem, or identify the problem before you can find a solution. And I do like what Tim is saying, is that I always hear my Chinese colleagues saying, but was not the intent, or we're really not aiming at you, but we are effective, so we cannot retaliate. But over the coffee breaks, no retaliation. But thank you very, very much for an extremely interesting panel. Yeah, no, we have 6-7 questions. Okay. Should we?
Maybe I'll jump to your point.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not going to be the microphone.
I think we can hear you. Use your military voice for the audience.
Yes, my name is Ceren Ergenc. I'm an energy entrepreneur, and maybe entrepreneurs tend to be optimistic and sometimes blunt. We've been working for many years with Jin Ling on several issues and things. And I'm going to say I'm upset. I'm upset because this de-risking thing is outrageous. We should stop it. It is extremely negative. There's one thing that you hear when you hear about the Chinese leadership, it's about win-win. And honestly, I haven't heard that word any time. Where is win-win? It's all depressing. Depressed China, depressed Europe, and we're trying to see how we can have a zero-sum game, let's say a negative-sum game. Now the time has come to have common projects. And now I will be very good. You, Mr. Jin Ling, mentioned we're all getting old. You know what? There's a nice word in Chinese, in China about that. That's called longevity. Longevity is an incredible challenge that we should all work on. And the other one, that's energy. Yesterday, the European Union said we need to work with North Africa for energy, which is exactly the theme of this conference we had 3 years ago about the China, Europe, Africa triangle on renewable energy. We need to work on that. We need to have common projects and stop, sorry, to being depressed and stop about de-risking. This word should be out of our vocabulary. Sorry.
Should we open up for more questions? Well, we have a lady back there.
Thank you so much. I fully agree with the entrepreneur's position. I just want to add also a comment that there is an ancient saying in China that risks comes with gains. 机遇风险并存. If you want opportunities for Europe, you have to embrace the risks rather than de-risking. So as far as I understand, like China, Europe, they're like in a situation where we should not emphasize resilience for both sides, because sometimes it is compromises or empathy that makes the real game changes. So for instance, when it comes to the current imbalance of trade, for Chinese companies who are arriving at the European doorsteps, I think they should also have some empathy towards how we can help Europe boost competitiveness, not just to sell the products. So for instance, when China firstly embraced Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Merck, Lego, when they arrived in China, why did China open up and embrace these companies? It's because these companies, they actually brought competitiveness to China also. And now China is developing to a stage where it can also bring this stuff to Europe when it comes to new energy, when it comes to new competitiveness. And I don't think competitiveness can grow in Europe overnight just by kicking out all the best players on the court. I do believe that making both compromises and embracing the risks while collaborating is the way forward for new, better EU-China relations. Thank you.
Gentleman here.
Thank you. I have a question for the team. You mentioned the issue of risk perception, which I agree is a very important issue, and you list the EV as a case. So you think that Europe was not taken seriously in the EV case, and you list some of the European concerns. I would like to share the Chinese perception on this issue as well. So from the Chinese side, the issue is that Europe put tariff against Chinese EV, which I think not only China, any other country wouldn't like that. So and then China proposed the, I think, quota limit and price undertaking. But I think it was the EU who, didn't take this proposal seriously until Donald Trump returned to the White House. I think this deal was agreed in the same period. Okay, so I think that was a perception from the Chinese side. Well, I'm not trying to accuse, but I hope this could, bridge the perceptual gap between the two sides. And I think the EV case could still serve as a good example to bridge the gap and find common ground.
Okay, yeah, that's indeed a perception gap, at least, because when I was in the Commission, there were plenty of discussions with the Chinese side. Neither side refused to talk, but our perception was very much that we would get nowhere near what we got with the price undertaking. In the end, there was, ahead of the EU-China summit, an attempt to get what we finally got in January. And again, the perception very much here in Brussels, and from having seen some of this, I share that, is that China was not willing at the time of the summit to agree to that price undertaking. Anyhow, it's good if this is a good example and if we can work on it. What would be even better is to reach such compromises without sort of an escalation before. And I think there indeed sort of the perception of that case diverges. On de-risking, let me say, and mutual cooperation, let me just say this. I mean, please also realize that exports, Chinese exports to Europe are not going down, they are going up. So if you compare to the US, where since Donald Trump came to office, there's a significant decrease. So whether you're depressed or not, be it you or be it someone else in the audience, there is de facto a lot of economic cooperation between the two sides. So I don't know where this depression comes from, and that risks exist, or that they are at least perceived, and by all sides. I think it's a matter of fact. If I hear from the Chinese side that Europe should embrace the risk when it wants to take the opportunities in China, I invite you maybe not to also embrace some of the risks and lift localization requirements, lift market access requirements. But I keep hearing from Chinese friends that China is still on the road to opening up, and there's no question there are restrictions being lifted, no question, but others are also put in place. So what I'm saying is, in the end, I'm not sure that an entirely reciprocal regime where Europe would just put in place all the localization and market access requirements that China has in place would be something that you embrace so much. So I'm a bit careful about this. I think risks exist on both sides, and I'm not sure that sort of that approach of accusing the other for just seeing the risks and not the opportunities. I mean, you can say this. Of course, we live in a free world, but I'm not sure it's helping.
We had a quick comment there as well.
A very quick comment on this perception gap. Listening to my fellow panelists and the audience. That's why I was suggesting actually a bottom-up approach for partnership, because there's the concept of trust. I think we haven't pronounced it openly, but that is the underlying issue that makes the bilateral relations so contentious at this point. And the lack of trust at the top level comes from different rhetorics and different perceptions of these rhetorics. Like Jin Ling, you mentioned the China shock, China killing industries. I mean, the Belgian Prime Minister said China is going to eat Europe for breakfast just yesterday. You know, I loved it when I read it, but I understand how it can be offensive to the Chinese side. But at the same time, as someone like talking to both sides extensively, I also noticed, with all due respect, both Chinese officials and experts as well talk differently at closed-door events, discussions, and public discussions too. And what I noticed, again, talking to both sides, when, for example, the Chinese side, either officials or experts, mention, for example, protectionism, well, the European side perceives it as a deliberate talking past avoidance of the points that Europe is trying to make. So when we rely on these top-level conversations or announcements, statements for trust building, it is a uphill battle. That's why, again, I want to reiterate my point of bottom-up building of trust, sectorally and issue-based. And this conversation, this back and forth between Xiaohua and Tim about EV tariffs and perception gap, I think it's a good start. More rather than debating the definition of de-risking or protectionism at the abstract level. And with that, I'm gonna, yeah.
I'd like to also respond to the perception issue. I think after entering the area of European studies of China-EU relations, the issue has been always there. the perception gaps on different issues, we have to admit the reality. We are different. But the fact is, we are not so different as we imagine. Sometimes I think the difference have been overestimated. How to bridge the gaps? I think it's important to put your foot in others' shoes, as I've said. I agree with, Tim has said, here in Europe, lack of understanding or knowledge of China. I think the gap here for China political system, for China history, I think is even wider compared with the Chinese, knowledge about Europe. As scholars, I like to say, you pointed out the issue, but frankly speaking, Tim, we are good friends. But when you're talking about aging population, it's added difficulties for China to solve the problems we're facing. But as a Chinese, I told you what are the perception gaps here. I see that is a really opportunity for China to handle the issue we are facing. For example, the aging population today is opening up the markets for the service trade. We have witnessed the booming of this sector. So that is another, we say to turn the burden into opportunities. From your perspective, it's a burden, it's difficult. Of course, it is, but we have turned it into the opportunities to handle the imbalanced, so-called development. Another type of a perception gap.
The final comment.
Thank you so much. Few comments for a few seconds. Indeed, I echo with this lady beside me that now we need to have a new ecology of the China-Europe relations, especially, for example, when we're talking about de-risking issues, not only just for the government-to-government issue, it should be inclusive and open environment for more companies, enterprises, and investors. Just like this gentleman from the company, they do have a very, real and pragmatic understanding about how it is important for this, common interests or very, very strong linkage economically between China and Europe. So these de-risking issues could not be just, made or decided by few people in Brussels, in European Union Commission. Another, I think, important thing is what's a real or loyal attitude from partners to Europe as Chinese consideration. I think China takes the value of these very, very important relations with Europe. So even China now started to feel that maybe from Brussels, for some other capital cities of European countries, they take more consideration about the security, about Russia, about some other. But look at this economic situation, higher and higher energy prices, and less trust with China, and they try to find out even new strategy to deal. Yes, it could be maybe long-term efforts from European Union to reshape its investment, its trade environment. But the big problem is, yes, European Union should have your long-term strategy, but how could you find out a real opportunity to deal with the current situation? Don't forget, comparing with some other major economies, both China and Europe, we are feeling a real same problem. Is we do have a very, very big dependency of energy. So we should have our own energy independence. We should insist this direction that we should have a green transition. But unfortunately, before that, we should deal with these EV issues seriously. Otherwise, we will miss the opportunity that we can work together to finalize or to find out a solution that we can have the energy independence finally. And the last but not least, President von der Leyen emphasizes, okay, now it's time for European Union for this principle or direction of go back to the future. Yes, undoubtedly now European Union is go back to the past, maybe without the future. So it's time for European Union and China work together to find out a way that, okay, perhaps it's necessary to go back to the past for a while, but finally we need to find a new approach to the future. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And now we have 0 seconds for coffee, just so that's clear. But I think Mr. Gupta might give us 5 minutes for a fresh air and a bit of coffee. But let me thank the panel for an absolutely fantastic presentation.